navigating the challenging world of dementia care, searching for the right approach. What if there was a way to connect with and understand the person you're caring for, even as their world changes? In this episode, we dive deep into the heart and practices of person centered care, what that means, how to achieve it, and how to enjoy caregiving as much as possible. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome to Fading Memories podcast. I'm your host, Jen Fink. If this is your first time here, welcome. If not, welcome back. With me today is Jen Riggs. She is the Director of Dementia Services at the Dementia Family Support, and we are talking about person-centered care, specifically 6 pieces that make up the whole puzzle. So thanks for joining me, Jen, one of the few guests whose names I won't butcher.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I will let you fill the listeners in on the rest of your bio. That way, that I would butcher.
Not a problem. So, as you said, I'm Jen Riggs. I am Director of Dementia Services, but dementia is definitely my passion. I've always been intrigued by it. I started as a concierge in an assisted living, and I had never had experience with anybody with dementia, but I just naturally gravitated to my residents that were living with it, and I wanted to learn more. And so that became my goal, and my career goal was to learn as much as I could. I became a certified dementia practitioner. I became a support group facilitator. And the more I learned, the more I really loved the idea of Teepa Snow's PAC community, positive approach to care, turning the narrative to retained abilities and quality of life versus, what this disease is doing to a person. And little did I know I was on the right path at the right time, because fast forward, and unfortunately, my father wound up with vascular as well as Alzheimer's dementia. And I went from knowing it all to knowing nothing as a daughter and somebody who loved somebody who was going through this disease process. And I learned so much in books, but nobody taught me as much as my father did. And knowing him prior to the disease, seeing him throughout it. And unfortunately, I did lose my dad in January of 2024. But if I can help somebody else along this journey, then you know what? He didn't die in vain, and he can help me help others through this journey.
That's kind of how I feel about my mom. I lost her at the beginning of the pandemic. Teepa Snow was my 200th guest, and we're almost up to 400 now. So that's blows my brain. Let's see. Let's start with, can you define person-centered care? Because I'm sure newer caregivers, even maybe people that have been doing it a while, might be like, I've heard the term, but like, what the heck is it for real?
Absolutely. So it's really about putting the person you're working with as the highlight. And with that, you really have to know who they are in order to support them. One of the methodologies with PAC and Teepa Snow is to do with somebody rather than doing to or for them. And that's really the ideology behind person-centered care, is how do you engage somebody in the way that is most respectful and dignified to their personhood. And this way we have positive outcomes.
I think that's what I was trying to do with my mom in the beginning. And we were failing miserably because I didn't know about Teepa. There were fewer books. So, which is how the podcast got started, and how I actually attended. Teepa had a seminar, like literally in my hometown, which was not huge. And that was July of 2019. So we all kind of knew what happened a little less than a year later. And my mom died at the beginning of 2021 or 2020. So had I not seen Teepa then, I probably wouldn't have actually seen her in person. And if I know she doesn't do quite as many things in person anymore, but if you ever get a chance, holy Toledo, she is so entertaining while educating you about Alzheimer's or dementias. So
Absolutely.
one question I have, well, maybe we should get to that one in a little bit. So, my mom liked to sit around and basically shoot the breeze,
Mhm.
which would have been great had there been enough breeze to continue a conversation. And one of my struggles was like, how do I engage with her in a way that she wanted without literally losing my own mind? So, can you, I'm sure I'm not the only caregiver that's ever dealt with that. Can you like offer some suggestions on, you know,
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things with dementia is that it's ever evolving, and what works in one moment may not work in the next, and always having a plan B, C, D, and E. And, also being able to look clearly at ourselves in a reflection of how we're in our own state of mind. And, one of the things that Teepa does, and I kind of love the classification of stages of dementia in gemstones.
mhm.
And she talks about, somebody who is completely cognitively intact is a sapphire. And then the beginning of cognitive impairment is a diamond. But even somebody without an actual medical reason for a cognitive impairment, we can find ourselves going into diamond states when we get a little too rigid, we get a little too much about we have to do this or we've always done it this way, so it's always going to work. And that's the biggest challenge as a caregiver is how do you create a routine that can evolve, but at the same time meet the needs of both the caregiver and the person giving the care, and person receiving the care. And of course, the person receiving the care is the main focus, but we have to be able to, learn to fill our own needs. I always tell families, you can't give from an empty cup. And we have to make sure that we're finding ways to vent. I'm a big believer in support groups or having, allies in the village to really talk through some of the ups and downs because it's not always a sunny day. Sometimes we have some really cloudy storms, and we need to be able to vocalize that just as much as the good things that we highlight. So, it is definitely about taking care of yourself so that you can be a better support system for taking care of somebody else. And, again, knowing the person, you know, if she liked to gossip and to chat and to talk, knowing the topics that you can kind of deep dive into, going back in time to, things in her 20s or 30s that really sparked her interests that can actually have us learn a little bit more than we ever knew. It's amazing how the brain works that a lot of times the short term is damaged, but that long term is so intact that they can almost tell you what they were wearing the day of a big event, yet they can't tell you what they had for breakfast. And that's somewhat of the gift in some aspects of dementia is that we just have to go back in time with them and go where they feel the most comfortable. And we get to learn a lot about who they are and their personhood from when they were growing up.
Yeah, that makes sense. She always asked, "What have you been up to lately?" And I would answer it, and I knew then better than to ask, "Well, what have you been up to lately?" Because that's way too open-ended. So I would ask like a more simple version of that question. Um, you just, what have you done? What did you do after lunch? Or what did you have? Or something much simpler. Or I would be, what was it like? Well, I just came from a lunch meeting. Did you have a good lunch? Or something along that. And I'd get, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay. That's like not even hardly two syllables, much less a whole sentence. And I wish I had known to like ask questions, like I didn't, it took too long to figure out how to go from, so what have you been up to lately? Literally every 2 minutes to, well, I've done this, that, and the other thing. Haven't you done something like that? I never figured out because I didn't have people to talk to. And I did not have a big enough village because back then you didn't really talk about it as much. And friends who had gone through it were still kind of recovering. So they were like, I don't want to hear it. So, like one gal accused me of complaining. I'm like, because my mom had her dog in memory care and the dog she was a lot. And she was trouble. Not She was trouble because she was so overweight she couldn't do doggy maintenance, doggy
Mm.
hygiene. And I was struggling with, do we rehome the dog? Is that the right thing for mom? It was like There's too many souls to try to consider. And I would kind of talk it out, and she got tired of hearing it. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, sometimes you just need somebody who walks the path with you so that you can commiserate together. Because if you haven't experienced this, and especially caregiving for somebody with dementia, it's very foreign. And, it can be a challenge for others to understand that you're kind of on rinse and repeat over and over again. And sometimes we have our own limitations. But I'm glad that you did find the methodology of, you know, I share, you share. It's a great way to communicate with somebody who has cognitive impairment. If you give them the foundation of the conversation you want to start, I'm having a great day. I'm in a really good mood and I'm loving the weather outside. How about you? Can kind of lead the way for the conversation to go. And even if they mimic back just what you say, it's still a dialogue.
yeah, it's better than what have you been up to lately? Every 2 minutes, and her response being, "Oh, it's the same way." Like literally after about 20, 30 minutes, it's like, okay, I'm gonna start beating my head against this. We were usually out in the courtyard. So I'm gonna beat my head on this stucco wall, which is not going to help, but something is killing my brain here, and it's either gonna be this wall or her. But I did have a good experience once where like all of the pieces clicked all at once. And I showed up, and so she was the oldest of four kids. My aunt was the youngest. And my mom was talking to me and she said, "Well, my brothers are normal people now," which first off, that cracked me up because that's kind of a weird statement, but it's kind of humorous. And I was on it and I said, "Well, I think Steven might be normal, but Richard, nope." But the biggest key was I knew not to ask about her sister. So her sister is 11 years younger than she was. And so when my mom got married, it just barely past 19. She like turned 19 in January, got married literally a month later. Her sister was 11. So my mom missed a lot of the formative teenage years and all the big changes my aunt went through. So it it wasn't a surprise intellectually that she didn't remember my aunt. It frustrated me because the younger brother and her sister visited, whereas the other brother disappeared many, 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 many years ago, out of our lives.
Yep.
I mean, he might is still involved with his siblings, but he wasn't part of my mom's life. And so it was like I laughed, I made the comment. I think I might have asked a question or something, but I was smart enough not to ask about the sister and just bring the whole thing down to like, oof, not a great level. And then literally it didn't take very long, like a minute or two of that entertaining conversation. She was off on something else.
Yeah.
But I still, I remember that day. I remember where she was sitting, kind of what she was wearing, but mostly because I have a photo. And I just remember it being funny. My brothers are normal people. Well, I don't know about that.
I think humor is a great way to handle dementia. I'm famous for cracking a joke at myself for somebody's, benefit. And it was actually funny. I work with a woman on a weekly basis that's pretty moderately progressed, not very able to express herself verbally anymore. But I started putting on music and Macho Man came on and I started dancing and singing. And by the end, both of us were completely belly laughing to the point where it hurt that we were just laughing so much. And it was such a great interaction and so much fun. And it's nice that you can still have those moments of connection and joy, and humor is a great way to do so.
Yeah, I had to learn how to use humor because my mom was in memory care for 3 years. And for the first maybe 18 months, so half of her time there would be times when she would just toss out. And I think it was times when she was frustrated, just like, my brain just doesn't work very well anymore. And it'd be like, oh God, no kidding. You think? And, it would kind of hit me in the heart like, does she know? Like, is she aware that her mind is failing? I mean, she was advanced Alzheimer's, so I'm thinking no, but there was a part of me that was like terrified that maybe it was yes. And just to kind of get past that cringy, oh God, bad feeling, because I didn't want to her to be aware of that. Sometimes I'd make a crack like, oh, yeah, my brain doesn't work very well either, or something. Or one day I just agreed with her. I'm like, yeah, your brain is garbage. And she laughed. I was like, whew, thank
Oh,
you. It's
it
like,
is kind of, yeah, it's fascinating the way the brain works. And that's one of the things that intrigued me so much about dementia and things that we're still trying to understand and learn through the way the brain is structured, that there are sometimes these really clear moments. And my father was that way every once in a while, even as he was pretty progressed, would just, Jen, is there something wrong with me? And I'm like, and sometimes I had to read the room. Sometimes it was okay to have the conversation of, yeah, Dad, you have dementia, but guess what? I'm right here with you, and you couldn't have anybody better by your side. And sometimes it was the same response. Dad, we all have issues. It's okay. Like, we're all in the same boat. So again, talking about person-centered care, you have to be able to look for those cues and see what kind of mood. And if we're in a negative mood, putting more negativity into it is never going to have a positive outcome.
nope.
But if it's a genuine question and you feel like you can make that connection, sometimes having the hard conversations can actually have good outcomes too.
Yeah, I believe it. There's a guy not far from me who's taking care of his dad. His name is Dan Salinger. He's really popular on YouTube. And he's always reassuring his dad, Dad, you're 93 years old. You've got some memory loss, but and he just starts listing all the positive. You got plenty of money in the bank. You're fine. Everybody's good. Da, da, da. Just constant reassurance because obviously when his dad wakes up, he's confused and like, what the heck's going on? And, you know, I've learned from him, even though my mom's gone, and it's been nice because occasionally he's said something on a YouTube video short, asking a question. I'm like, oh, I can answer that. Or he said something one day, and I'm like, I don't even remember what it was, but I put in the comment, like it could be this or check out that, and he's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I was like, yay, I'm helping. Because he's got, I don't know, thousands and thousands of followers. So it was nice that he actually even saw my response. But I just like that he's constantly reassuring when his dad is confused, because they frequently get confused about money. His dad gets very concerned where his car is, and he'll just remind us that your dad, you're 93 years old. I am. It's which always seems to like, once he understands, oh, hell, I'm old, then that seems to make you don't drive anymore. You got some memory loss, but it's okay. You live here with, me and my wife, and you've got plenty of money in the bank and blah, blah, blah. It's just like I can almost list all of the positive things because I've heard him say them so much.
But it's so needed. And again, the empathy that comes along with this, that there are, the golden rule, treat somebody as you would like to be treated. And if we're having some anxieties about, I don't know what my finances are, I don't know what's going on with me, having that reassurance goes a really long way.
It's funny because sometimes his dad will argue with him. You're not Dan, blah, blah, you're somebody else. And it's like, he handles that really well, considering, he's basically saying, no, Dan, you're not Dan. It's like, ugh. My mom thought I was her best friend. So I just looked at that as an upgrade. It did sometimes feel like she was a little bit more formal with me than she might have been if she remembered that I was her daughter. That did make it a little challenging because she wasn't touchy feely. I tried once doing the hand massage with, moisturizer, to which point she just basically wrung her hands and rubbed her hands. And so the point where it's like, you are giving me anxiety. Don't have anxiety, but she did that a lot. Rubbed her leg or wrung her hands. Oh God, the wringing of the hands always made me so nervous because I'm like, I think that's self-soothing, but is she like agitated and can't tell me? I mean, she never seemed like it. The rest of her body seemed relaxed, but it was just this constant hand wringing or leg rubbing, or was another one of those instances.
I was gonna say, and that's the other side of this is, understanding the disease process and know that it's not just memory related. Vision changes are involved with, cognitive impairment, my ability to understand what is being broadcasted to me auditorily. So, I may only hear 3 out of 4 words or maybe even just the tones of what is being said to me. But then there's also the side of some parts of our body get desensitized and other parts of our bodies get hypersensitive. A lot of times families don't understand that the hypersensitive can be adverse effects with the shower because the pressure becomes almost like pins and needles rather than comforting, and that we have all of these other things going on that if we again understand it, then we can set ourselves up for success. And I would say probably in that wringing of the hands was probably a little bit of not much feeling in her hands, that she was trying to like get the feeling back, but then it also became soothing for her.
They're probably cold too. Like my hands are cold right now. So it's like, well,
Mhm.
she would do this too. That was definitely cold fingers.
Yes.
But a comment about showering. I did actually talk to a couple people living with cognitive impairment, and they've confirmed that the shower can be like just not the zen place most of us think about, because the water hitting can be painful. But if you walk into your shower, so like mine, my house built in 1988, it's got a big white tile with a little tiny grout that's really a pain in my butt. The house was owned by a much older woman. When she sold it to us, she was 100. So when I say I had to take the old lady out of my house, I literally mean that. I had to strip the 1988 out, get rid of the 100-year-old lady decor. But the only things in our shower besides the products, which are kind of like dark bottles, they're like white bottles or dark bottles.
Mhm.
Everything is white except for the grab bars are brass because it was the 80s. So you walk in, and then the water hits you. And if your vision isn't great, even for those of us who, I have weird vision, you don't really see the water. So it's almost like a sensory deprivation box. It's not exactly soothing if your mind is not, 100% doing what it's supposed to do. And so once I learned that, I was like, oh yeah. Because at my mom's memory care, they did a lot of things right. They had red plates, they had red napkins, um, a little hard, the tables were typical dining room beigey tables, but the red plates stood out. And I am almost positive the showers were like one color.
Nice.
So, it made the shower less appealing because it was like it's like it's like when you put a black rug in front of the door, it looks like a shadow. I think this was the opposite.
Yeah.
So just sensory deprivation.
Yep. And it is, again, if we start seeing it through somebody's with brain changes eyes, we start to realize what we normally classify as behaviors is just really natural reactions to pretty scary things. And, you know, I've had clients before that, they didn't realize that they almost drowned at one point. So the water can actually bring back those memories. So we have to know past traumas as well to make sure that we're not going back in that time period and we are setting somebody up for success.
I have one guest who was, oh, she's a doctor, but I forgot what kind. And she said, so she was caring for her mom, and her daughter was very young. And so their cognitive abilities kind of ended up meeting. And she said at one point, it was just, she found it so much easier and so much more relaxing for everybody if she just gave her mom a bath.
Yep.
And I thought, well, that's pretty smart. Although, tubs aren't always designed real well for people that you need to move them in and out. We didn't really talk about that complication. There's ways of handling it, but at least, with a bath, you can put in bubbles and you can make it more appealing, and they're not going to feel like they're falling because they're sitting down and the water's not hitting them on the skin. And there's a lot to be said for that. I don't think we think about it because we kind of think, well, you're treating them like a baby. Like, no,
No.
like I like baths, but
Me too. That's my stress management. Whenever I have a really rough day, or a really physical day, give me a bubble bath and maybe a glass of wine, and I'm a happy girl.
Yeah. Our tub tried twice to have the plumbers fix it. So the faucet is just a trickle and it's like an old 80s jetted tub. It's probably like 70 gallons of water. And I'm like,
Oh.
how long is it going to take to fill it with this little, finger width trickle of water? And one plumber, when we had our home warranty, he said, well, you have water, so therefore your tub works. And I'm like, I wanted to ask him if his brain dead, but I refrained from being that rude. Because I was like, how can you say that? This tub won't fill. And we have a heat pump, so it would constantly fill with hot water, but it would probably take hours.
Yeah.
So I haven't had a bath in 3.5 years, but I do take showers. Don't worry about it. You don't have to be thankful it's a podcast because I smell bad. No, that's not the case. Just talked about my shower. It's not the most luxurious shower, but those grab bars come in handy because tiles are slippery. Wash your hair with the conditioner and whoop, those tiles get slick. And that grab bar is kind of nice to have.
Yeah.
I don't always like to admit. So we're talking about putting ourselves in their shoes, which I hope we've given the listeners some ideas of how to kind of think about it. Is there some advice you can give in addition to what we've just talked about on how to get into like their reality or their shoes?
Absolutely. So, going back to the 6 pieces of the puzzle, 3 of those pieces are really things we have to accept, and that is the person. And again, like I said, knowing their likes, their dislikes, past traumas, who they were prior to, any kind of diagnosis, what changes the diagnosis has actually had on their personality, and, ultimately their goals for their quality of life. The other is the brain changes. Unfortunately, there's no cure for dementia. There's no way to fix it once we have some hope with slowing progression, but that's about as best as we can get right now. So you have to accept that the brain is dying and that it's going to have different characteristics. And the third piece of the puzzle that you really have to just kind of accept is overall health conditions. If they have, other comorbidities, diabetes, heart failure, things like that. These 3 pieces of the puzzle where we really do our detective work and try to kind of do the changing in order to have successful outcome is A, in the time. People, if they were always a morning, get up and do their routine, then that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck when it comes to ADLs. If they were always a night person that, the morning was never really their cup of tea and they did better at the end of the day, then you know what? You're going to have more success working into their natural rhythms. The other is the person that's providing the care. Not everybody is best at every task. And knowing that, you might have more success with one family member doing a shower than another family member. Or again, understanding modesty. Some of the hardest things is that we have a lot of, female caregivers, but we also have male caregivers. And when you're a female that's not used to being in front of other males naked or in a very predicament that is uncomfortable, we have to be aware of that as well. So again, changing the person that is helping can really have a difference on the outcome. And then the last is the environment, making sure that it's forgiving, that it's functional, that it's familiar, that it's going to be the best case scenario so that you have all of these fail safes kind of figured out. So that's really where, when we problem solve, is you just have to know the first 3 pieces of the puzzle and accept it and work, in that realm. And then you really play with the other 3 pieces of the puzzle to really make an outcome that fits the need.
So before we get to those last three parts, I have a perfect example of knowing the person. So my mom, I would visit once or twice a week. And then after about the third week, I'm like, I am 99% certain that she has worn this sweater every time I've been here. And we're talking like a 3/4 length sleeve, medium-ish weight, light to medium-ish weight sweater in August in Northern California. It's like, lady, I know you like it warm, but dear God, like, like you're gonna overheat. And so I asked the caregiver that was predominantly responsible for my mom, are you having troubles getting her to change clothes? Oh, yes, yes, yes. And she's giving us trouble with showers. Turns out that they had gotten some new residents and they'd shifted around the shower schedule and they moved my mom to the afternoon. And I said, no, 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 no. I said, I'm not trying to make things harder for you, but my mom, if she did chores or, like worked on painting a room or did something where it got to be like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she'd just wash her face, maybe slap on some extra deodorant, and call it a day. Because why the hell are you going to take a shower at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you're just going to take a shower again tomorrow about 7:30 in the morning? They switched her back to mornings. They had way less problems. And what I did, and this one was a bit of a challenge mentally for me because my mom literally went from a 10-foot double hung closet plus the 8-foot closet that was in my bedroom when I was a kid, full of clothes, to literally a single door closet that's probably like 2.5 feet wide. So I'm like, this cannot possibly be overwhelming. There's like next to nothing in here. To at that point, we were starting to get into the cooler time of year. So I took out all of the really hot summer clothing, knowing that she was always chilly. I figured we could switch over to the autumn winter clothes, which for people who live places that are actually really cold are probably laughing right now. But, you know, it's our temperature. We'll live with it how we do. And that really helped. I mean, it wasn't a lot of summer clothes versus winter clothes, but just removing like the capris and the short sleeve shirts. And I don't think she had any tank tops or anything. Just taking those out greatly reduced the number of clothes in her closet, and she stopped giving them as much trouble changing. There was other issues that are typical, but it's just surprising these little tweaks just make things so much better.
Absolutely. And again, sometimes too many choices become overwhelming. And, again, setting up the environment to be forgiving and familiar and functional. So sometimes a summer wardrobe, a winter wardrobe, a spring wardrobe, a fall wardrobe really can minimize some of the anxiety that comes along with getting dressed.
And see, in my head, we went from holy crap, woman, you have way too many clothes to almost feeling like she didn't have very many. And I knew she didn't need a lot, but it was like we went from so many to so few, that the so few still being too many for decision making was kind of hard to wrap my head around. But once I did, took care of a lot of the problems. I remember I had a friend that used to sell I forget what brand, it was the catalog clothing back in the, I think it was a multi-level marketing business. And it got to the point where they had so many options that their sales went down. It was like decision paralysis. It's like, I want it all. I can't afford it all. I don't know which pieces to get. Oh, forget it. I'm not getting anything. And so they cut their choices significantly, like a third or maybe even by half. And the sales went up. And it almost doesn't make sense when you think less choices, more sales. But yeah, when we have too many choices, it's like our brain gets overloaded and we kind of like, we either settle for, if we're at a restaurant with a 10-page menu, same stuff we always get, or we just say, oh, forget too much. I don't know what I want. And you don't,
That's when I just go for the dessert.
that's a good choice. That's what mom and I would have gone for. So we did the first three pieces of the puzzle. What's the fourth, fifth, and sixth ones?
So the fourth, fifth, and sixth are the ones that you can change, and that's the caregivers, or we call them impact stakeholders. It's the time, and it's also the environment. So those are the three pieces that is where you're going to change things around to have a better outcome. So example, like you said, no showers in the afternoon because that wasn't part of the routine. You move it to the beginning of the day, you're going to have a successful outcome. So that's your timepiece. Environment, things like, again, if a shower is uncomfortable, we're going to have a tub that's easier to get into and have the water ready at the right temperature, and the environment is in the right manner. And then again, the stakeholder, the person who is actually giving it. Again, if not everybody is best at everything. So I've had, caregivers that they're great at giving a shower, but they're not a great at feeding. They're a little too impatient. So again, utilizing the right person for the right task will give the person that's needing the help that familiarity and that comfort.
That might have helped my mom because it ended up because of lack of training. The caregivers she had were great, but it took two of them to shower her because as she got more progressed into the disease, the more help she needed, the less she accepted it. That was always fun. And they were showering her and she was angry. And they said, well, she reached for her clothes and slipped. And I looked at him, I'm like, this is after she died. I'm like, no, no, no. Not my mother. My mother went, ee! And that's why she slipped. Like, you don't slip just reaching for your clothes. You slip because you're angry and you're jerking away from somebody. And I don't blame them. Like I said, they did not have enough training, but I've thought about this and I wonder if the gal that was primarily her caregiver was Black from Africa. So she had an accent, which was probably difficult for my mom to understand because sometimes it was hard for me. And so the whole, as as she progressed, she probably would have done a lot better with a white chick with blonde hair or a white chick with brunette hair because my sister's a brunette. I don't think they had too many white caregivers. So that would have been a challenge. But training, like if they had gone through some of Teepa's videos, would have been huge. But these places don't do that. So
And that's the thing is, again, giving everybody the right tools and techniques because, again, we're looking into what's retained throughout the process of this disease and enhancing that and giving a quality and giving a purpose. And again, doing with, I had the opposite with my father. If it was a blonde haired girl that was telling him what to do, he would act very negatively because that was his daughter, and daughters don't tell fathers what to do. So again, it can work either way. And sometimes you do have to be a little creative and you have to be able to change the dialogue, even just the way we say things, a difference between you're getting a shower to it's time to get a shower. Do you want music on or would you rather have uh, a sound machine? Giving some kind of option can definitely change the way the narrative is. I'm giving you an option or I'm demanding. Which one would most people respond better to?
yeah, even if you're about to get in the shower, if somebody says, "Is it about time for your shower?" You're gonna be like, "Rare, I'm getting in the shower."
Exactly. And then I always tell people too, especially as a caregiver, you want to make a sandwich. You want to start out whatever is an activity that's usually more on the not fun side with something really fun and exciting and happy. And then you do the task and then you end with something that's in the same category. So like a shower, putting on a music, splish splash, I was taking a bath, have a little dance party, end the shower with a really, a towel or a blanket that was thrown in the dryer and really warm and cozy and put that around it, a big hug and like, we got through it can actually change the narrative for the next time we get a shower because there's an emotional memory that remembers the good that was sandwiched in the negative activity.
I've had people tell me they've had success with, "Oh, hey, remember Jen's coming over? Didn't you want to shower and wash your hair?" And that generally triggers like our social norm response. And sometimes they're a little bit more willing because there's a reason other than you think they should get in the shower right now. But I don't know if that always ends. I guess if you end it with something really nice, like for most of the people with dementia that I dealt with, my mom and other gals that she lived with, all you had to do if you got them into the shower in a more positive way and you ended with some sweets, that probably would have been
Yep, even better.
which I'm laughing because, a lot of people, I've had golden retrievers for like 31 years, and people are always telling me, "Oh, how well behaved they're." I'm like, if you would like to train a golden retriever, just offer them food.
Yeah.
Because my current golden retriever is like, her priorities are food, a human with food, or a human that might pet me. And if you're not in that list, she's going to ignore you. And what I'm saying, like, oh, end it with a treat. It's like, oh Lord, that sounds like talking to my dog. But you got to do what works and not. I think we get, at least I did. I got too much in my head. Like, don't treat them like children. Well, their brains are kind of. I always struggled with that one.
And you know what? It is a struggle because you don't want to, infantilize somebody, but at the same time, their brain and their safety awareness is at the same level as a child. So, you know what? Again, this is where you need to know their personhood, know what their likes and interests are, because those things are retained. I've had, you know, a resident before who was nonverbal but could still play the piano beautifully, and that was her way of communicating. And one of the things is the right side of the brain is usually less affected than the left side, and right is where songs and music and rhythm and prayer is all stored, and you can really use that to engage somebody and to have that outcome and to make those happy memories, and to just again, have somebody feel like they're living the life. And the other side of this is it's hard for families especially to accept. But dementia is a terminal diagnosis, and we're about quality of life more than quantity. It's on borrowed time. Now, that timeline, nobody has a crystal ball and nobody can really say exactly. And some forms of dementia have a longer, disease process, some have shorter, but you're always on borrowed time. So why not just make the best out of it? If somebody just wants to eat the sundae and not the meat, let them have the sundae and enjoy themselves, because you don't know when it's going to be the last day.
Yeah, I know some caregivers that are they're there's one in particular, their person is still around because their care has been A plus. Moved them to a vegan diet, just like, I don't know how she does it. I really don't. More power to her, because I loved my mom, but holy crap, no. I could not I could not do what this gal does, which it is helpful to acknowledge your limits,
Yep.
because she does not have, it's just her and her mom. No siblings, no spouse. The mom had like a complicated upbringing, so she's got like foster siblings and half sibling, like she doesn't have like an actual like 100% blood relative sibling that I'm aware of. And they're all up there in years, and some of them are starting to have memory issues, and others have other health issues. So they're not much, if any, help at all for this daughter who is in her 30s. It's like, oof. But that brings me to the question is, if we're so focused on them, how do we all not lose ourselves in person-centered care? Because we're focusing on a different person besides ourselves, and that can be detrimental to both parties.
Absolutely. And again, like you said, know your limits and know what is going to be too much for you. And that's when you have to call in help. And the biggest thing is to realize that you're human. You know what? We all have our ups and our downs and our good days and our bad days. And that's all okay. One of the things I try to tell families when I kind of coach them through, working with somebody with dementia or just working with somebody in general is, if you lead with your heart and if you're doing things because you really want the best for somebody, you got to throw out right, wrong, good, bad. Those don't exist anymore. It's what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes you just have to work through what doesn't work to get to what works, and realize that, what, it's okay to be human, and it's okay that we get to a point sometimes where we say, what, it's time for me to take a pause, and I'm going to step out of this, and I'm going to get somebody who's really going to be able to have success step in at this point. And then on the other side is just look for those opportunities to connect, bring your own interests and see where your interests intertwine, If somebody really likes music, bring your favorite songs and sing along with it and, make fun. Or, if you're an artist and, you really excel at doing arts and crafts, then you know what? Show that to somebody. And even if they can't 100% do it with you, they might really enjoy just watching you enjoy life as well. And I really think there is an emotional energy that comes that when you're doing something you love and you enjoy, that vibe just casts out into the world. And it's amazing what people respond to.
Yeah, I wish I'd known a lot of this better when I first started taking care of my mom, because they would have like coloring sessions in the afternoons. And this one particular afternoon, I said, I find coloring to be so relaxing. Why don't we join the other ladies in color? And so my mom was like, oh, okay. And she picked out, the pictures were fairly simple, understandably. And my mom had always had black miniature poodles. So she picked out a poodle, and that poor woman could not tell inside from outside the lines. The lines were black, and she always had black poodles. So she's trying to color the thing in black. So it was like I'd purposely set her up for failure. And it was, I'm trying to enjoy time with her, and that was frustrating. I was trying to relax, and I was just like, oh my God, this is just like so frustrating. I think if I had just like said, let her not color, but worked on my own piece, but had her like suggest, well, what color do you think should I do next? I'm not sure she would have answered. Or I would have probably had to say, should I do this color or this color, and hold them up. But a funny story, a lot of funny stories to share with you today. There's always this whole thing like, oh, music is the greatest way to connect with them. Yeah, I tried that 15 ways to Sunday. Never worked. Until one day I realized my mother listened to talk radio and talk TV. Duh. She would turn on the TV in the master bedroom and the TV in the family room. And as she went about her daily chores, she could pretty much get, you know, the the majority of whatever conversation. For those that are old enough, she'd watch Sally Jesse Raphael and Phil Donahue, and I don't remember all who else because I was at school. But she also listened. For those of you who are in the San Francisco Bay Area, she used to listen to Ron Owens. He was huge in San Francisco. And a lot of people ask, well, did you ever play her your podcast? I'm like, oh, God, no. Because I did not want her to realize we were talking about Alzheimer's, or I brought up her. But now I kind of wish I had, because I think she would have enjoyed it. I don't think she would have followed along with the conversation. I think just the melodic voices, the rhythmic tones of voices, I think she would have loved that, because I use podcasts to go to sleep at night. Sometimes they're sleep podcasts, and other times they're murder mysteries.
Oh, they'll go to sleep on the murder mystery. That could result in some bad dreams.
I have not had bad dreams, but there are times I wonder, like, I don't know, maybe I should listen to something else. But it is amazing how I can turn on a murder mystery and in like 5 minutes I'm out like a light. But then it's still playing in my head. So I'm like, I don't know. But I don't wake up stressed. I don't have nightmares that I'm aware of. So I figure it's probably okay. But I've had a internal medicine doctor, so they're kind of more holistic, suggest sleep meditations. She actually suggested I learn how to do it myself. I'm like, lady, if I am 58 years old, if I had learned how to like shut my brain off so I can go to sleep in 5 minutes, I would have done that 30 years ago.
Oh.
But I can like lay there and just do all the sleep meditations, and then it's like, okay, well, that's over. I guess I better turn on the murder.
Well, again, just in all life, you have to accept the person that you are. So guess what? You have your own interests, and just play into them.
I mean, even if they're, true stories like 48 Hours or Unsolved Mysteries or whatever, I read murder mysteries that are fiction. So in my mind, it's like, occasionally, if there's one that it's like, there was one that literally was in the town that I moved to in 2022. And I was like, oh, I think I kind of know where that place is. That's creepy. I listened to that one when I was driving in the car. Like, glad I didn't listen to this one while I was trying to go to sleep, because I was a little too close to home to just pretend it's fiction. So, is there any last minute or last piece of advice you want to give people before now that we've filled their brains with a lot to think about?
Honestly, the last thing is you have to be kind to yourself, just as you are kind to somebody else. I mean, one of the things I think caregivers forget is that love is a two-way street. And even though sometimes the people we love and we care for lose the ability to communicate that back to us, it's still there. And, we get caught up into this guilt of, I should do this, I shouldn't do that, I have to do this, I have to do that. But guess what? If your loved one loves you, they're going to accept you for your good, your bad, your ugly, and everything in between. So just remember that the love is two ways. So just as much as you love them, they love you back, and it's okay to be human.
And if you always strive to make them feel good in positive ways. So my mom always recognized me as the fun person. I was the person that took her to the park to watch kids or the pool or where they're always stalking little kids. It was my joke to other people. They'd be like, "What are you doing today?" "Going to watch little children." And then I'd be like, "What?" "Oh, yes." Then they'd remember and they're like, "Why do you say it like that?" "Because it's fun." Like you almost thought you needed to call the police. But yeah, that was so at the start of the pandemic when I didn't see her for 2 weeks, that was my panic. It was that she was going to forget that relationship and then we were going to have infinitely more problems. So she solved that one for me though.
Mm.
But there's episodes, I don't remember which ones they are, but if you listen to them, there's comments where it's like, it's been a week, it's been 10 days. I'm going to call the executive director. I'm going to go in. I'm going in one way or the other. And then
Yeah.
we were lucky because they called and said, she's not doing so well. And I went in, the hospice nurse was there, and I was like, and I had called hospice specifically for extra support. And then the pandemic got, she broke her leg on March 8th. So all of that happened just as the pandemic awareness and scare and everything grew. And I just called hospice because I'm like, she's got a broken leg. Everybody's going to need a little extra support. Let's just do this. I had no idea she would actually pass away. So I went and I saw the hospice. Or I walked in. I was like, oh, yeah, this is not ending how I thought. And then she passed away within about, it was more than 24 hours. So it was about 30 hours. And so we were lucky. We got to see her before I got to see her before she passed away. And then the day that she died, there was 10 of us. The poor executive director was like, whoa,
Oh,
on his hair.
it was a challenging time. I was in a building during the time, and as a staff member, understanding how much family wanted to be connected and trying to think outside the box on how to connect them. I had a lot of residents that had Zoom dinners with their loved ones, and I was kind of like in charge of going around with my phone and tablets and laptops and okay, set you up and I'll set you up and okay, you guys can talk. But it was definitely a challenging time, but I'm glad you were able to spend, the last time with your mom and be able to be connected, because that definitely is important. And I hope we never see those kind of guidelines and regulations ever be implemented again, because again, when we talk about quality versus quantity, this was the population that, yes, were so at risk, but at the same time, they needed their family and love to be around them.
Yeah. They did all the right things or all the wrong things for the right reasons. And I hope they've learned because, with my mom, the pandemic started at the end of March. They could have done a lot of stuff with families outside.
No.
They had a beautiful courtyard, a lot of stuff, but that's a whole other episodes.
For next time.
Where can people find you if they've got questions, or are you on social media? I forgot to look that up.
I am on social media, Jennifer Riggs, but best place is www.dementiafamilysupport.org. We're also on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. But it comes directly to me, so you can reach out for any kind of information, to talk through things. That's what I'm here for.
Well, all of those will be linked in the show notes. And I very much appreciate you beaming in this afternoon and sharing all this wonderful advice and giving me the opportunity to share stories today.
Well, wonderful. I appreciate that your time and allowing me to have this time with you as well.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.